So, I guess we start here. Hey, guys, gals, all those outside and in between, this is your host, SharpZ, and welcome to the first ever Extrasode. These are going to be a little different from what we normally do. So, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a basic portmanteau. It's a combination of the words extra and episode. So these aren't like a full episode, it's more so a little bonus that goes into the stuff that I researched or my thoughts that didn't make it into the final video. We didn't do one of these for JJ McField simply because I was like, oh, I can just easily get Corpse Party done. And then y'all saw what happened. I work a full-time job, so obviously I can't spend all this time making videos. I don't have that advantage, but I do enjoy what I do. And the next couple episodes should be much quicker. Because Corpse Party was just, oh my gosh. I guess I should talk about the episode development for this one. This is a very long episode when it comes to the amount of shit that went into it. So, jumping right into it, of course, the censorship. I had to pretty much entirely work out how are we going to censor this, how are we going to make sure it fits within content guidelines. And this is the first and only episode so far where I've actually considered doing a director's cut, where I just say no censorship whatsoever, except for on certain scenes. We will get to that later. But, there is just a lot to talk about with Corpse Party, with what did and did not end up in the episode on the cutting room floor. There were a ton of bits with ZZ that I just ended up cutting, not because they were bad, but because it was more so, this doesn't fit the tone. Finding perfect music for the episode took a good long while. You probably noticed there are one or two that are like, you've never used these before. Yeah, I had to spend a ton of time looking for music that was not from Corpse Party, but still fit the vibe of it. Weirdly enough, Pokemon and Kirby had some. That Kirby song traumatized me when I first heard it, and I was like, okay, we're gonna use it. But that's enough about, like, working around it. Let's get into the game itself. Because I think that's what most of you are here for. You aren't here to hear me ramble about how episode production works, or behind-the-scenes info the entire time. Let's talk about Corpse Party. So the stuff I liked. Character writing. Really good, honestly. You probably noticed that was the main thing I focused on in the actual episode, because I think that's where the game gives you the most to really, like, digest. If you look at a lot of its contemporaries when it comes to fairly dark horror, I think that that is the one way that you can make that genre really work, is if you focus on the characters, because the characters really do work as an anchor. If the game goes way too dark, you at least still know, okay, I do care about these characters. I do give a little bit of an iota about what happens to them. And what aids in that, I feel, is the presentation. So obviously the sprite art. I think I actually went about that briefly in the main episode, but something I do want to stress, that is really good sprite art for something like this. Obviously, it's not going to be at the same level as something like Owlboy, or if we want to get really technical, something like Hyper Light Drifter. It's not going to be the same as that because it's not going for the same thing. This is a basic RPG, pixel RPG style game at the end of the day. Like, RPG Maker obviously was the engine it was first introduced in, and those kind of games have a very specific aesthetic. Usually the sprites are not too detailed, you have only so much space that you can put the characters in, and the amount of expressiveness that they get within that space is genuinely impressive. Granted, I think they ported it to Unity, but I think it was a fairly straight port from what I've heard. It wasn't like there was a ton of work done. There were new character models, and I think new voice acting added in, but I want to say that is it. There wasn't, like, a ton of work done to go from Corpse Party running as Corpse Party to Corpse Party running in Unity. But continuing on the presentation, voice acting is stellar. No notes. Fun fact, the voice of Sachiko Shinazaki is it's Pikachu's voice actors. And I was so tempted to bring the Pikachu bit back from the RPG episode just because I'm like, this is the one time I can do it. I ultimately decided not to. It wouldn't fit the tone. It would be too weird. It would be too niche of a gag for anyone who's not familiar with who that voice actress is. So, I ended up not bringing it up. But, just general audio, phenomenal. Sound effects, on point. I really do think they capture that kind of disgusting, grungy feel perfectly. ADR. At no point in the game do I distinctly remember thinking, oh, this audio is out of place, or this audio is bad. This doesn't feel like it should be here. You could always hear the dialogue, and, it makes sense with how it's done. I think the binaural audio really does work for something like this. It gives them a lot of stuff to work with that you really wouldn't have in a basic visual novel format otherwise. Um, but the standout audio is the soundtrack. And that actually, I will go ahead and say, it's standout for pretty much the entire series, with one game having a couple exceptions. But even when the series gets bad, the audio is, they know how to make a really good song. And I remember when I first played the game, I thought, oh, songs like Ray of Hope and the Chapter 1 theme are great, but they don't really fit what the game's going for. But after a while, I kind of like just realized, hey, of course these songs sound good. You're going to be like hearing them loop over and over and over again, so they have to. But even beyond that, it's also the use of things like Leitmotif or Ray of Hope was, I think, the big song where I was like, this is from a horror game. That's weird. But then in context, it's the moment where everything finally feels like it's on the up and up, where it finally feels like there's a hope to get out of here. So that tone goes from, oh, funny that we have like club music playing in a literal hell of human creation, to, oh, this is kind of fun. This is just a little bit of a reflection of how the characters feel. One more compliment before we move forward. Actually, two. Map design. The map design here is honestly pretty good. I have a soft spot for maps that are small and easy to memorize. Not every game needs that, obviously, but when we're talking about survival horror games, which clearly this game did pull some from, there's not a lot of survival horror mechanics. I think it does appear maybe like twice. I want to say the beads appear in like 2 or 3 chapters, but that's it. And then there's the chase sequences, which are, essentially an adaptation where it feels more like them saying, yeah, we can take the mechanic of you being chased. We don't necessarily have to give you a way to fight back, which makes sense. This isn't the kind of game where fighting back would work. But I feel like when it comes to the map design, right, it really does work because you kind of have an easy map to get a layout of in your head. So, and it works with the fact that this is a text-heavy game. So, for example, when the characters say, oh yeah, in room 1A, I'm like, okay, I know where room 1A is. I know where room 2A is. I know where all these places are because the map is fairly easy to memorize. Like, I remember by the time I was doing the video, I was like, okay, I need a shot here, I need a shot here, and I just kind of knew intrinsically where everywhere on the map was, because it is a smaller map, and that very much is an advantage of this game, that it's recognizable, it's memorable, and it makes it so that when you're playing different chapters, wherever the cracks are in the floor and you can't go, that feels like a big deal, because usually they try to make sure you know what is behind there, so you're like, okay, this is the area I can't visit, so the puzzles can't be here, and it does help kind of streamline the experience. I think I said it in the video and forgot to actually elaborate on it later, but in Chapter 1, there was one moment where they didn't really telegraph what you were supposed to do. Like, it made sense if you went into that room. but in any other context, you're probably thinking, this is really stupid. Why would I do this? Um, and I think that that's the real thing with Corpse Party that I find frustrating, is sometimes it plays by the rule of don't do something stupid, and obviously it's something stupid. Like, for example, with the pool scene I talked about, everything that you could do wrong is something that the player would have knowledge of beforehand. Or something that if you wouldn't know, you would know by the fact that you can read notes or check your surroundings. But there are other times, like I think the mannequin was one where, of course, you're going to check that out. I feel like the game shouldn't punish you for just checking something out. Obviously, they do put a save point near that, so it's not the biggest ordeal. But I do think it is inherently interesting that the game does make that decision sometimes. And I do understand that it does kind of add to the helplessness of the situation, but at the same time, it is an issue. The other compliment I want to give is the urban legend feel. So, Corpse Party has this distinct feel like it is an urban legend. And whether that be from the opening, where it's kids telling ghost stories to each other, or later in the game, where you begin to suddenly realize that everyone who dies here is just forgotten, it feels like a Japanese urban legend. And I'm saying this as someone who's got passing familiarity with it, because a lot of Japanese urban legends kind of have a more it's less that you're going to be violently murdered most of the time, more so spirited away. Like, I remember the train, for example. The elevator one, I don't know if that came from Japan. I think that might be Korea. But, like, there's this train station urban legend, as an example, where I think it's like Shinjuku Station, I believe is what it's called. And essentially, when you go to that station, you just disappear. And Corpse Party really has the same feeling as that. Granted, this is the only game that I think nails it, because as it goes on, they try to add more of a, oh, this is the reason why it exists. When I think what makes it compelling is the fact that we get all the information on why it could exist, but we don't ever get a concrete answer of, this exists because of this, or this is why Sachiko came back. Usually it's just like, oh, it's through hatred, or yada yada. And I think that really does work for what the game is going for. It feels more like an urban legend. It feels like something that could feasibly go under the radar and not be a big deal until it is. But that's enough of me being, just completely positive about the game. Let's get into the negatives, because there are quite a few. Sexualization. That's kind of the elephant in the room here, let's be honest. Corpse Party has quite a few moments where there's unnecessary sexualization, particularly with the younger cast. While psychosexual horror is a thing, like Suspiria, or Silent Hill 3 to some extent, most of the time these don't really add to the horror. They aren't something where it is horrific for the character to go through. It's more so, oh, the camera angle's down here, so you can see this. And I think there is an inherent difference. For example, there's a moment in Silent Hill 3 that I'm going to go ahead and point to, where Heather gets a creepy phone call. That works, because that is something that is happening to Heather. That is something that, as the player, you're like, this is a moment where I empathize with what Heather's going through, where I kind of understand, oh, this is what it's like growing up in a society that tries to push you to fulfill a certain role at way too young an age. But it is kind of a recurring thing with Corpse Party, and it does get worse as the franchise goes on, and I just felt like remiss to not mention it. Also, there's the stuff with Yuka, which, I'm going to be honest, made me immensely uncomfortable. I understand that people have bodily functions. I understand that people need to use the restroom. And I'm not a prude when it comes to these things. I don't inherently think that including things like sexual fan service that's for the audience, or um, pee and poop jokes are bad. What I think the issue is these don't add to what the game is going for. If anything, it feels like a moment of the hand of the author, which, if anyone is not familiar with that term, it's the moment where you can kind of feel like essentially this isn't something that the character would do, this is something the author wanted to happen, so they're kind of forcing their hand to make it happen. And that's what these moments feel like. It doesn't feel like, oh, Yuka needs to use the restroom again, is something that fits the character. It feels like the author's saying, well, I really need a contrivance to push the act forward, and I don't want to do something character writing wise. Let's just have Yuka need to pee again. And it's something that does keep happening. I have noticed that. Every time Yuka shows up in the franchise, it happens. And there's a point where it goes from, oh, this is just a little character quirk to, I know what you're doing. I can see what you're doing. And it's wrong. Particularly because, and this is something that I think is the big issue with it, these characters are underage. Like, for example, I do think you can definitely play this kind of horror with underage characters and make it work and not feel very, exploitative. Like, I think Silent Hill 3, for example, has moments where it feels almost voyeuristic for the player. Like, you feel uncomfortable looking at this. You're like, I want to look away. I really do not want to fucking see this. Corpse Party doesn't do that. It just is like, oh, look at this. And I'm like, I don't want to look at that. Because it is a character who is 17, or in Yuka's case, she's 14, which I will not understand why they made a character 14 and made her act younger. I feel like if they wanted to have a younger character, they should have just gone for a younger character at that point. Would it have been much darker? Yes. Would it have possibly been too dark? Absolutely. But it was very clear they were like, well, I mean, we want to write a character who feels like she's 7, but let's just make her 14 so everyone doesn't get on our case. And I'm still going to get on your case for it. Because the moment a character is under 18, my standards kind of differ, and it goes from, okay, just be respectful, don't make it the entire point of the character. Like Bayonetta, for example. She's above 18. She's sexy. She's hot. She knows it. That's the character. That's why we love her. Or someone like 2B, where it's like, the sexualization is partially commentary. Now, granted, I do understand Yoko Taro does like hot women, and that is definitely a part of it too. But you can have something that plays both roles. Or, heck, something like Stellar Blade, where the sexualization's just there. And I forget how old the characters are. I think they're robots. But I remember, like, a friend of mine was talking about it, and he was like, this is fine because I know what I'm getting into. I know that this is a game that knows what it is. Corpse Party is a serious horror game until they put the camera in the wrong angle, and suddenly you remember, oh yeah, there are people who made this, and those people really should be questioned on a couple things. Now, I do think that care would need to be taken for this to be handled properly, and I'm not saying Corpse Party's far from the only game that does this. Like, dear lord, there is an entire rabbit hole I can get to on this. Like, Fatal Frame, for example, sometimes does this. Not saying every game does it, but Fatal Frame does it often. And the issue with that series is usually they're around Yuka's age. Weirdly enough, they actually act like they're around Yuka's age. These characters are 14, 15, and act 14, 15. But, that's beside the point. It's just a frustrating, aspect of the game that I would feel remiss to not talk about. And I do want to go ahead and say, this is why we will never cover Corpse Party 2U. Because I plan on covering Book of Shadows. I plan on covering Blood Drive. 2U only has like one chapter that actually applies to the lore. And it also only has like, one or two. It has the music. The music is great. But the entire game is just made for the worst fans of the franchise. It feels uncomfortable for me to even, like, broach the subject, because considering the age of these characters, considering some of the stuff that's in that game, I don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. I do not want to deal with having to censor that, or having to cover it, or even talk about it. And luckily for me, there's only one bit of it that's lore important, and I can easily slide it into a different episode. But I do think that our core issue here, right, when it comes to everything it does wrong with this sexualization, is just the fact that these characters are not 18 or over makes it inherently uncomfortable. Like, if it was Miss Yui, I'd be like, that's still weird, but she is like 23, I believe. So I would be like, okay, that's weird, but fine, sure, you can have that one. But when it's goes from this serious prose about a character dying, or heck, the context of the two scenes in particular, one is right before Mayu was thrown into a wall and dies, which, hardly the time. And the other one is when Ayumi is freaking out visibly. There's also one when Sachiko gets choked out. So, like, with all those moments, the thing they have in common is those shots being there is clearly just for fan service. It's not adding anything to the plot. I understand a lower camera angle or a Dutch angle can make something a little more uncomfortable. I get that. I understand that's a part of cinematic language. However, just move the skirt in the render very slightly, and this entire problem is fixed. And when it feels like you could fix it by merely doing a redraw, and I would be able to show the frames, and I wouldn't have an issue with them, then it becomes a problem. Alright, let's just get away from talking about Corpse Party proper, because I think I've said most of what I want to say. The good, the bad. So let's get into something else. Adaptations. Oh my word. So Corpse Party, for those of you who are unaware, is a franchise. And as a franchise, it has multiple adaptations. This isn't something like J.J. McField, where the game happened and it's done. No, Corpse Party has a very dedicated fan base. And as such, the main story of Corpse Party proper has been adapted multiple times. Whether it's the PC 98 version, which is very different, but I don't want to get into it because we don't have the time. And I'll be honest, I didn't play it. I already played the ones that are more modern, and I don't really see a reason to go back and play 98 right now. Maybe at some point in the future, but I'll rather cover Corpse Party proper and then get into 98. But the adaptations, all their issues. Let's start with the one that's probably the most well-known. The animated OVA. Okay. Oh boy. I feel like I'm gonna... I don't know if this is gonna be a hot take or not. It is boring, for the most part. Now, on one hand, I understand it. When you take a game that is as long as Corpse Party, and you squish it down into about an hour and a half, you're going to have to make some cuts. That makes sense. I understand that. But it feels like what they did was they cut at the weirdest places, and it kind of removes, number one, the main mystery. Number two, they cut most of the character arcs. So something I went into in the actual episode. Most of these deaths hold a thematic weight when it comes to the main cast. In this version, aside from Seiko's death, which is played essentially the same way as it is in the game, they do not really play with this concept at all. First off, let's talk about Mayu's death, which is pretty much the exact same. However, you don't really get that much of Mayu. If I remember correctly, she only shows up twice and then dies. And they also do something here that I'll get into later, but it is worth talking about. Then there's the death of... So Yoshiki, Yuka, and Satoshi do die in this version, which is different from the original. But Morshige. Oh god, Morshige. I have a ton to say about Morshige's death here. So, number one, they have Kazami kill him. Which, okay, sure, whatever. I don't care. It makes sense. What am I saying? It doesn't make sense. Like, when I say it makes sense, I more so mean, okay, placement-wise, these two are near each other. You have to get his death out of the way, sure. But, here's the thing. his death not being shown shows a dramatic irony that the Place of Heavenly Host has. It's not going to give you the kind of death that you want. And Morshige kind of realizes that, and he takes pleasure in it. So, of course, when it kills him, it does the one thing that he would probably think, there's kind of a Schadenfreude. Well, no, not Schadenfreude, that's the wrong term. Schadenfreude is more so what Morshige is feeling. But with Morshige, when he dies, like the fact that it's not shown is telling. It makes it feel like the place is almost saying, okay, you are so obsessed with corpses, I'm not going to show yours. No one's going to find your body. No one's going to see it. And I feel like Morshige would hate that. I feel like that's something that it's playing with the character and making the death thematic. In the movie, he's just... Excuse me, not the movie. In the OVA, he's just killed by Kazami. Sure. All thematic weight is lost. And it also immediately removes that tension that was achieved by Yuka being protected by Kazami when the audience knows almost immediately that something is off with this guy. And I feel like that tension being removed does really mess with the plot a good bit. As for the deaths that are already there, Yuka's death is fine. It's pretty much adapted how it was in the game. Yuka's not really an important character to the themes, so sure. Yoshiki, on the other hand, so Yoshiki and Ayumi's relationship is never really touched on in the OVA to the same extent as it is in the main game. And it kind of hits at the core issue is that the OVA relies on you having played the game to understand what's going on. I watched it with someone who had never played the game. And I had this realization of, oh my god, the only reason I understand what is going on is because I have played the game. And the only parts that feel coherent to someone who hasn't are the very beginning and the very end. And like, Yoshiki's death is emblematic of that because he dies from the mannequin, I believe. Actually, no. He dies from holding back the mannequin. And it, like, in the original, that sacrifice hits harder because we've spent time with these characters. We know what Yoshiki and Ayumi mean to each other as friends. Like, it makes sense. The death hits harder. However, in this version, they kind of fucked it up. They don't really give you time to sit with these characters, to understand their dynamic, to understand their relationship. Aside from Seiko and Naomi, because they kind of spend a good bit of that first episode focusing on them, and it works, there's not really anything. And let's get into the big thing. The sexualization I talked about, it's back, and it gets worse. This feels like they took the flaws that the later entries will have, and just superimpose them over Corpse Party proper. And the reason I say that is, number one, all those flanderizations of the characters where they try to do things that are like fitting into more of a basic view of them than these more complex portraits that were painted in the original. That kind of starts here. The sexualizations in Overdrive, like, what was just one frame in the fucking game is like an entire camera angle in the movie. When the person I was watching with and I both pointed it out, we're like, we are shown this literally like 30 seconds before she's thrown into a wall. And Miss Yui also dies very quickly in this version. It just feels like they are speed running it without understanding what works about Corpse Party. But there is also a live action movie. And I can't believe I'm saying this. Somehow it's worse. So, number one, an issue with the anime that's kind of lightly there. It's dark when it comes to lighting. You can't really see what's going on. Forget about trying to be able to see the movie. You cannot see the movie. The live action version is honestly, like, it takes everything that the animation might have had going for it. Like, at least it's visually interesting at moments, and just takes that away. The school looks bland. They changed the order of the deaths again. So Miss Yui dies first, which, sure, whatever. You're not going to use her as a character. Just get her out of the way. But they also pretty much truncate everyone's arc to the point of non-existence. So the barely existent arcs within the anime are now gone. Kazami is cut, which, sure, fine. I can see how you can make that work. Instead of having Kazami kill Morshige, they have it be Yoshikazu, which, okay, fine. Both of those are options, I guess. But the core reason I'm saying they truncate stuff to hell, Naho is gone. Now, on one hand, I can understand having to cut characters for the sake of time. However, Naho is vital for the progression of the story. I think that that's something that's not like... Because she acts as the guide for the other characters on what's going on and gives them subtle hints. And the characters making the leaps in logic they do does not make sense if there's not someone there giving them, like, even vague hints. And also, the way she antagonizes the cast does add a more personal malice to Heavenly Hosts. And I think that removing her, but they still keep, for some reason, the Kokubiki and... I'm forgetting the cameraman's name. Inumaru? Like, they still do keep those scenes. But it just doesn't hit as hard because we don't have this element of tragedy that Naho adds into that story. And I think that, like, it's just completely messed up. Like, every single thing that works in the original is just gone by this point. For those who don't know, the movie was adapted off of the anime OVA. So they took a lackluster adaptation and took out even more luster. So it's completely lacking in luster. And it's just... The gore looks fake, for one. Like, I understand, it's a low-budget made-for-TV movie, but the gore looks bad, and it's clear that at moments they're just using the darkness to hide everything. The only thing that makes it comparable to the animated OVA, and a little bit better, is it's shorter. It's about 10 minutes shorter. And there is one more thing. Sachiko's actress is having way too much fun. Like, there is a scene where, I believe she kills Yuka in this scene, actually. Because this one has all the same deaths as the, OVA. But when she kills Yuka, she says, "I'll send you to mom in hell." Which is much a funnier line than it has any right to be. Because why would Sachiko think her mom's in hell? Like, I mean, I'm familiar with the series, so obviously I understand why Yoshie might be in hell. I mean, I know she's done some things that might upset the church, but that's not what the important thing here is. The important thing is that it's really funny. Like, Sachiko's actress is having way too much fun being just the only person on set who actually is like, well, if I'm gonna be evil, I might as well have fun with it. But I think that's enough about the adaptations to the screen. Let's talk about the adaptations to the page. There are 2 Corpse Party mangas. The first one is Corpse Party Blood Covered, which is... It's just kind of a straightforward adaptation. I don't really have much to say on that one. There are a couple issues I have with it, but the gore looks pretty good. The actual appeal of the games, I feel like, is somewhat there. It's just a more reader-friendly version. And honestly, manga is a fine way to adapt it because you can keep the prose, you can keep the uncomfortable moments. It works. However, there's one more. Corpse Party Musume. Oh god, Corpse Party Musume. So this one is that kind of manga. I only read, like, the first chapter. I couldn't bring myself to read the rest of it. Because, essentially, the big difference with this one, number one, they pretty much take out all the characters who came after the original Corpse Party on PC 98 out. So Seiko's gone, Mayu's gone, Morshige's gone, Miss Yui's gone. Which leaves Yuka, Satoshi, Yoshiki, Ayumi, and Naomi. And they add one more character in. They add in weirdly enough, I think it's a trans woman. I think that's what the character is supposed to be. I don't know. It was written by people who clearly don't know how to write a queer character like that very well, because she just exists to be killed. And I really didn't like what I read, because it was very obvious what it was, like it knew what it was, and these are underage characters. I don't want to read that. I'm not going to read that. I have my boundaries of what I will do for the sake of making a side video. And I got through the first and second issue, and I'm like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I was like, maybe I can ignore it. I read issue 1, and I was like, okay, maybe issue 1's the issue. I read issue 2. I'm like, no, this is going to be the same thing. I'm not reading through the whole thing. I did look at the summary, and apparently it just keeps getting worse. Like, people get tentacled to death in this version, which weirdly enough does act as foreshadowing for stuff that happens later in the series, but this one just feels like it's not something I have no interest in ever coming back to. But with adaptations done, with my thoughts on the game done, let's get into the conclusion here. How do I feel about this one? Corpse Party, to me, feels like it's obviously very schlocky. It is exploitative horror. I know that I kind of read into it, but that's kind of my, like, the point of the show is we read into horror games. So I have no reason to really act like, oh, this game has no depth, because there is some depth there. But the core issue with Corpse Party is just there. It feels like there is number one, the one person in the writing room you need to rein in. That's a big thing, because there are moments where I feel like if someone had just said, no, we're not going to put the camera there, no, we're not going to do this, a couple no's really would have saved this game. There's also just the reputation this game has, I feel like, is more so earned by its sequels than the main game. And I'm not saying that there aren't, like, absolutely horrific moments in this, but I'm saying, like, the reputation that Corpse Party has as a purely shock value franchise feels more so appropriate of a description for Book of Shadows or Corpse Party Blood Drive than it does for this. Like, this game has moments where you can genuinely tell the character writing's what they care about. And for that, it works. It genuinely does work. I would say overall about a 3 out of 5. Excuse me, not a 3 out of 5. I always rate games out of 10. No, it would probably be about a 7 out of 10. It's nothing that I have, like, any desire to go back to. I played my fill of it. I probably know more about this game than I should at this point. And I do understand why people like it. If you like this game and you think I'm being too harsh on it, I can understand why you would. And to each their own. But at the same time, I am exhausted of this game. I am ready to go to something a little more lighthearted, which is what the next episode's going to be. I'm already scripting that one out as I'm recording this. So, you know. But I do think that overall, I don't want this to be like the thing we do from now on is cover the darkest horror games of all time. Because the show's supposed to be fun. Corpse Party was one that, as I essentially was talking to my producer, and she was like, you need to cover something dark. You need to throw something in there that's a curveball this season. And Corpse Party was what we landed on, because obviously there's other horror games that are so dark you can't use them. This isn't one of those. And I do appreciate it. I do think that what it does is some of what it does it succeeds in, some of what it does it doesn't, but at least it takes those swings most of the time. It goes to those areas that horror can go to that other genres really can't. That's one of the big things with horror that I really appreciate is that you can push characters hard. Like you can just say, fuck it. Now you have to deal with this blood and gore and this oppressive atmosphere. And in other genres, there's like limits to how you can do that. But horror, you can really push characters to their breaking point. That being said, I'm probably not going to play this game again anytime soon. I am excited to get into Crow Country, which is the next one. Already working on the script. It's going to be a really fun episode. I hope to see y'all then. Until next time, guys, gals, all those outside and in between, this is your girl SharpZ signing off.